Hey everybody, and welcome to Dominion Cards, the video series where we take a strategic, in-depth look at various cards from the board game Dominion. Today we're looking at Wishing Well. This is a 3-cost action card from Intrigue, and it says +1 card, +1 action, name a card, then reveal the top card of your deck. If you named it, put it into your hand. So Wishing Well draws first. Whenever you play it, you draw the top card of your deck, and then you get an opportunity to guess what the next card is. So essentially, you have to guess the second card from before you played the Wishing Well. Now, if you guess correctly, Wishing Well is like a laboratory. It essentially draws you 2 cards and gives you back your action. If you don't guess correctly, it is what we call a cantrip, and it revealed the top card of your deck. Now, that on its own is not a very strong effect. However, Laboratory for 3 is incredibly good value when you consider that Laboratory costs 5. But the problem is that it's not necessarily consistent. Sometimes you really got to work hard to make sure that Wishing Well is actually a 3-cost Laboratory. Most of the time, when you are playing with Wishing Well, you are going to be blindly guessing what the second card in your deck is. Now, sometimes there are going to be synergies that remove this risk. We will get to that later, but most of the time, it's just going to be a guess. So Wishing Well rewards you for keeping track of your deck. What you want to be doing is you want to keep account of all of the cards that you own. Usually you want to do this anyway, but, especially like normally you would keep track of how many of certain key cards you own, like maybe like Witch, how many Witches do you own, for example. With Wishing Well, it's important to try and keep track of everything. And also you want to keep track of the cards that you've seen so far this shuffle. You can count the cards that are in your hand, and you can also count all the cards that are in play in front of you, and with those together, that should help you narrow down what cards are still in your deck. Sometimes you're going to have a discard pile, but, a lot of the time you may not, and so what you can do is between the cards in your hand and the cards in play, you should have some sort of vague idea as to what's still left to draw that you haven't seen yet. And, of course, if you choose to play your Wishing Wells as late as possible, what that does is that leaves you with a much smaller deck of cards, ideally, to pick from, and that helps increase your chances because it reduces the possibilities of what sort of cards you're going to have in your deck. Now, do remember that you do get to look at the card that you draw before you need to guess. So essentially, after you've drawn, you are guessing what is now the top deck of your card, and that sort of eliminates the number of possibilities by 1 and might change your guess. Sometimes you will be in a state where you are looking like your turn is going to dud unless you get a specific card. So imagine that your starting hand was Wishing Well, Smithy, and, 3 other cards that we don't care about. And they're all stop cards. So you play Wishing Well, you draw another stop card, and what you'd really like is a village so that playing the Smithy doesn't end your turn. In cases like that, what you should probably do is just guess for the village, or the card that basically you need to keep your turn going. And it might not be the most common card, it might not have very good odds at all. However, if you do that, then what you may find is that by keeping your turn going, you actually end up with a much, much better turn than you would have if you dudded and guessed for something like a copper, where the copper probably didn't really matter. What you actually wanted to do was draw your deck and play all of your important cards. So you don't always guess for the most common card. Sometimes you want to do things like that. Now, of course, the less variety of cards that you have, the less possible choices there are to pick from. So if you think about your deck at the start of the game, it consists only of 2 types of card usually, and those are going to be coppers and estates. Now, there are heirlooms and there are shelters that can change that from future expansions, but most of the time it's just going to be 7 coppers and 3 estates. So if you add Wishing Well early, then what you're going to find is that you have this deck where the odds of picking the correct card are quite high. That's because you've just got a whole load of coppers. You've only got essentially 2 other types of card to pick from. Similarly, if you build a deck that has a large number of similar cards, then again you improve your chance to guess correctly. So if you've bought like a whole bunch of wishing wells, then you might have quite a large density of wishing wells in your deck, and that means that the odds are is that you will successfusly guess if you guess wishing well a lot. You know, your odds improve just because you have so many. Other examples can include if there is no copper trashing at all, then coppers remain a pretty common card in your deck, and so you can just guess copper every time. Sometimes you get cards like Trading Post that will convert your deck into one that is mostly made up of one type of card, so silver in its case. So these are just more examples. It's not the only situations. They're just there's more, I'm sure you can think of them. Another thing that you can do is that if there is discarding available to you and you are able to draw essentially most of your deck with Wishing Well, or all of it ideally, what you can do is that you can play the discard cards like Poacher to keep discarding the same type of card, like maybe you've got some coppers or estates, and then when you've drawn through your deck and you just want to draw the rest of your discard pile, what you can do is that because you've always discarded the same type of card, you know what's in your discard pile and you guarantee that every card is the same. So sometimes you get a bit more control like that, and it's just sort of another advantage as to why you might want to play Wishing Wells late, if possible. Now, is Wishing Well a good card to open with? It does cost 3, and that's a very affordable price at the start of the game. Well, as I explained a little bit earlier, you have a high density of copper early on, so you have very good odds to guess copper and actually succeed, in which case you've essentially had drawing 2 cards for costing 3, which is the same cost as a silver. So we've explained before in my Smithy video that draw is kind of the same thing as economy in the early game because you're so likely to draw coppers. Drawing 2 cards is most of the time going to be equivalent to getting you 2 money. It's not always going to be like that, but it's got pretty good odds of doing it. It also cycles through your deck, so it tends to be better. Now, this is going to be a little worse than adding a standard draw card that draws you 2 cards, because it does have extra chances to fail. You're not actually guaranteed to get 2 cards out of it, because you could reveal something like an estate. But, it's pretty good as an opener. Because it is a non-terminal card as well, if you open with another terminal card, like maybe you had a Militia for your 4 and Wishing Well for 3, then you don't have to worry about terminal collision. So if you draw them both together, you can actually play them both. And lastly, it's not a stop card in the long term. So even if Wishing Well just becomes too difficult to guess with later on in the game, it's not using up some of your stop card space. And sometimes that's going to be really important and is a reason why you might not want to take the silver. So that's all about guessing with Wishing Well, but sometimes there's no need to guess. You can completely eliminate any chance from it and guarantee to succeed every time. And Wishing Wells can be very good in those situations because, a cheap laboratory is just so efficient for how much it costs. So how do we do this? So there's a couple of ways. Number one that you will see a lot is what we call deck inspection. So some cards will look at the top X number of cards of your deck. So you've seen some examples of this before, like in our Vassal video, but here is some more examples again. Patrol in Intrigue draws you 3 cards like Smithy, then it reveals the top 4 cards of your deck. It might put some of them into your hand, but usually there's going to be a lot that you put back, and in the order of your choice. And that means you know what the second card is because you rearranged the cards and you put it there. So if you immediately follow Patrol with a Wishing Well, you should be able to guess correctly. Wandering Minstrel from Dark Ages, there's like a village that also does this. Now what it does is it automatically discards any card that is not an action card from the top 3 cards of your deck. So sometimes you aren't actually going to reveal 2 cards, but a lot of the time, and especially once you've built up your deck, you will find that you frequently reveal at least 2 action cards, and then Wishing Well will start working. Sentry from the base game, this is just another example. It will, after playing it, reveal 2 cards, and if you're not going to trash or discard either of them, then that is 2 cards that you put back. And again, you know, if you have a Wishing Well in hand, what card you can draw. So there are loads more examples than this. Again, this is just a couple of examples. Some cards actually let you choose to put cards in certain places in your deck. So Secret Passage from Intrigue. This is like the most well-known, my apologies, combo with Wishing Well. So with Secret Passage, you get to put a card from your hand anywhere in your deck. So you can just put it in the second position in your deck, and then you know, if you've got a Wishing Well in hand, what you're going to draw. Stash is a promotional card, and this is a little weird one. Every time you shuffle, you get to put it anywhere in your deck. So this is going to be a little bit harder to set up than Wishing Well sometimes, but you might be able to put it somewhere, and then if you play your cards carefully, you can keep in mind that you know that a stash is there. In addition to that, stash has a different coloured back to every other Dominion card. So if you play a Wishing Well and you draw the first card, you actually know if a stash is on top of your deck because it's got a totally different back. Lastly, you can do 2 top deck effects. So Wishing Well doesn't really combo with top decking because it draws the top card first and then you guess. But sometimes you get to top deck multiple cards, and then Wishing Well can work. Now, you do have to top deck 2 cards in a row without drawing between them, but that doesn't mean that the first top decking card couldn't be a draw card. So maybe you have like a Courtyard or a Harbinger that draws a card and then top decks. Well, if you follow that up with, say, Artisan, you get to gain a card, top deck one, and then you know that the card that you top decked with your Harbinger or your Courtyard, you know what that is. It's in the second position in your deck. So you can now play a Wishing Well from your hand and guess correctly. I have a couple more examples. Replace is a card from Intrigue. That's why it's here. And it's like a remodel, but it will top deck if you gain an action or a treasure with it. So that's just another card where, because it's top decking and it's not drawing you, you might be able to play 2 replaces, and then you know what you're drawing with Wishing Well. And another special example is Ghost Ship from Seaside. So this is an attack where you top deck cards from your hand until you're down to 3 cards in hand. So usually you will be top decking 2 cards when your opponent plays a Ghost Ship, and Wishing Well is sort of a known counter to Ghost Ship, kind of, in that if you had a Wishing Well in hand, you know what your top 2 cards of your deck are, so you play Wishing Well, and you are back up to, you're back up to 4 cards in hand, so it's not quite the same, but you got the cards back. It nullifies Ghost Ship a bit, so it's pretty good with that. There are, of course, more cards that top deck that are available. This is just a few examples. A couple more things we can do with Wishing Well. So if you don't need another card in your hand after you've played Wishing Well and got the first draw, what you can do is try to improve your next turn by guessing for a card that you don't actually need now and don't want in your next hand. So imagine we are doing some sort of like weird big money Wishing Well strategy for some reason. Say you play Wishing Well, you drew like a silver, and now that means that you are at 8 money. So you don't actually need any other card in your deck because you can just buy that one province you were going to. Well, what you can do is you can guess for like a state or province or something, and hopefully you will find one, and you essentially take it out of your next hand. And so that can be a case. This is sort of an extension of the point earlier where you sometimes just want to guess for the thing that's best for your current hand, but in this case it's guessing for the thing that improves your next hand instead. When you fail to guess correctly, you do reveal the top card of your deck, and some cards really like it if you know what the top card of your deck is. So Vassal from the base game is an example. Now in the case of Vassal in particular, Vassal wants you to have an action card on top of your deck, so what you can do with Wishing Well is you can guess for something that's not an action card, like one of your coppers, and then if you guess correctly, that pulls that off the top of your deck, so Vassal has a better chance to succeed if you play it next. But if it misses and it reveals an action card, then you know that the Vassal in your hand is going to succeed, and so you have a chance to play it. Now, there are other cards other than Vassal that care about the top of your deck. This is just an example, and sometimes you can help improve the odds of that sort of card by carefully choosing what you're guessing with Wishing Well. If you are overdrawing your deck, so you've got way more draw than you need, and you also have the ability to discard, so maybe you have a poacher, what you can do is you can try and seed your next turn. And what you would do for that is, one example is you can discard 2 cards. You can discard a card that you want to have in your next hand, and you can discard something else. Then, once you've drawn all of your deck and you have these 2 cards in your shuffle, what you can do is you can play a Wishing Well. It will draw one of those cards, and if you drew the card that you wanted for next turn, you can guess the other card and draw it up, and then, you're not leaving a card you didn't want in your next hand on top of your deck. Alternatively, if the bad card was at the top of the shuffle and you drew that, well, you know that the good card you wanted is left on top of the deck. So what you can do is you can just intentionally guess something else like Curse, and then you won't draw it, and you leave it on top of the deck. There's a similar thing you can do here if you only have 1 discard, which is probably slightly easier sometimes, and that is that if you have exactly 1 more card in your deck, you can discard a good card. You can play a Wishing Well to draw that 1 good card, and you can intentionally guess incorrectly, and you will have to shuffle your deck to reveal that good card, and then it will be the only card in your deck because you have to put it back, and that similarly seeds the deck. But sometimes you can't do that because the 1 card that was left in your deck also draws and you wanted to play it, so, just sometimes you get to do these things, and you should just keep an eye on it. So that was Wishing Well. So now what we're going to do is we are going to go over to the online client, and we are going to generate some random kingdoms that involve Wishing Well. And we're just going to assess these. So let's take a look at this one. So what are we doing here? Well, we've got village and nobles for village. We have torturer for draw, and also nobles, and I guess Wishing Well as well. We do have upgrade for trashing, and that's our only trashing. So upgrade's important. We're going to want to trash down our deck. We're going to want to play as many torturers as we can, because it's a really strong attack. There's nothing our opponent can do about it. And we will probably... Do we open mill? And what else could we open with? We could probably open with vassal. We want to try and get to 5 as soon as we can to start the trashing. Now, is there any buy in this kingdom? Yes, there's pawn. Okay, so we've got a fully blown engine here. There's no easy way to add payload to our deck. Well, I guess there's vassal, which is cheap, and we can trash everything down. So we've got a very good engine. So I think we would open vassal, and we would open mill. So mill is a card that's extremely good at helping you hit 5, which is why we want to open it for 4. And then I think we don't really need the Wishing Well. I think the vassal is probably going to be better long term because we want them. I'm not sure how much we really care about Wishing Well here, just because we've already got pretty good draw with village and torturer, and possibly some nobles. Maybe we just don't get nobles for a while here. I don't think we particularly care about nobles. We just want to play as many torturers as possible, so we want to focus on village and torturer, but I don't think we open village. I think we open vassal. Hopefully we can get 2 upgrades. If we get a lot of upgrades, our opponent torturing us doesn't matter early on because we can just take the curse and then trash it with the upgrade. So I think Wishing Well is ignorable here. I think we can pick it up, but I feel like if I had a spare, 3, I would probably rather just get a pawn or a vassal or something instead. So I think Wishing Well could be ignored here. It's sort of not good enough to really be worth it compared to the other pretty good cards that are available at 2 and 3. You know, it's just not powerful enough to beat those. What have we got next here? We have Sentry for trashing. We have Replace for remodel style trashing as well. We have only Throne Room as a village. Do we have any draw at all? We have Moat. We have Wishing Well. Moat is nice because Swindler is pretty horrible, as is Replace is cursing and junking. Whereas I guess it's not so bad as Sentry. Throne Room is fine as a village because we have sentries. We could potentially have poachers, but we're going to want to play conspirators. Is there any buy in this kingdom? There is not. So how I would really like to get my deck is to get it thin. I'm going to want at least one Replace. We're going to have Throne Room. Is Artisan good here? I think so. It can gain. It's a gainer. We desperately need a gainer in this kingdom because we don't have any buys. So we really want Artisan. We're going to open... I think we have to open... Does Swindler matter here? So giving our opponent curses instead of coppers doesn't feel like it matters that much because we are going to try and get clean with Sentry. If we get our moats hit, then they turn into estates, which is bad, but it's not the worst thing ever. I think Wishing Well's probably... I want to say Wishing Well is better than Moat, but Moat's defence, if you can get enough of them, should come into play, but I don't know if the village is necessarily good enough. We actually want more cards that give us +1 card, +1 action, because we really want to kick off conspirators. That's going to be our main source of money. We don't really want treasures in this deck. And a poacher is also probably fine, but conspirators just going to get us the money we need quickly, because we need to be buying 1 province per turn. Swindler is... I think we get it anyway, right? So we open Swindler just because we could completely destroy our opponent by luck, and it's something that you can just play anyway. It gives you 2 money, and you're not sort of hurting for the terminal space. It's just the draw that's not brilliant here, but we can get pretty thin, and the draw doesn't matter. Wishing Well is fine. We could get Wishing Well here. I mean, what do we open on 4? Do we get Poacher and Swindler? I think we get that. I can see I might get a Wishing Well. If I have 3, I'm never going to buy silver after I've got the Swindler. I'm probably just going to get some Wishing Wells. And eventually I might start getting some moats, but I don't need them straight away. So Wishing Well, you're going to buy here. Because there's not really much else you want to get, I guess, for 3. And it's fine. It will draw you sometimes. I don't know how much you rely on it. I think it's going to be inconsistent. You're going to have a whole bunch of different types of cards in your deck, but you'd still get it anyway over silver. Just there's much better sources of money that are available. So Wishing Well is sort of low impact there, I think, but you kind of get it anyway, but you're not that fussed by it. What's happening here? Do we have a village? Yes, there's festival. Do we have draw? Well, there's always Wishing Well, of course, but there's nobles too, and nobles is decent. We do have conspirator. Do we have any trashing? We do not, and that's a problem, actually, with our village being festival and nobles. So we've got workshop, gardens, and mill. That's a nice combo. The draw is really expensive here, is the main problem, and with no trashing, it's going to be really hard to build an engine. So I think we have workshop, gardens, and mill, and we are going to probably just play that. So I think we open double workshop, and we look to gain mills and gardens, and what order we get them in is going to depend on what our opponent does. But I think this is workshop, gardens, and mill, and we sort of just ignore everything else. And I don't really care for Wishing Well in this case. Workshop's too important. I don't feel like there is a very good engine to build otherwise. As tempting as like mill and conspirator is, you just can't get a good enough density and cellar. I like that. I think that can be fast enough. So Wishing Well, you just don't bother with it here because I think it's a Workshop Gardens board. There's no terminal draw except at 6. It's too expensive to do like a big money thing. So, yeah, I think that's that. What do we have here? We have Trashing with Moneylender and Upgrade and Steward, of course. So lots of trashing options available for us. I like Steward the best normally. Our village is Shantytown, which is not great because the only draw is Moat. So there's not really draw, except Wishing Well, of course. The only way to get your hand above 5 is Wishing Well. So I think Wishing Well is actually going to be pretty important here. You've got Ironworks. You can actually gain quite a lot of Wishing Wells. So you want to trash first with Steward, I think. So you're going to open Steward and... Do we go Ironworks? I think we do. I think we go Ironworks just so we get a lot of Wishing Wells. I don't think we particularly care for any card that costs 5. So we want to open Ironworks because everything we want is costing 4. We're going to get at least 1 silver, and I think we would aim for merchants and eventually some vassals. There is no plus buy available, so we only care to get it to 8. And we're going to do that with a mixture of mainly merchants, probably some vassals. And we're going to use Wishing Well to give us a little bit more draw. We want as many Wishing Wells as we can get. We probably get more than 1 Ironworks, to be honest. We probably get a couple of Ironworks, 2. Would we get 3? Do we really want to add that many cards into our deck as soon as we can? I mean, probably. The Wishing Wells are not going to hit a bunch of the time once we trash down, because we're going to have a range of different cards. But I think that we can do sort of a cantrip kingdom to get to 8. And we have Wishing Wells to try and add a little bit more stock card space to our deck. So I think Wishing Wells really important here as the only draw. Yes, even though it's not great draw and it's not very consistent. We're going to want a lot of Wishing Wells, as many as we can get, but we've got to balance getting Wishing Wells and our economy on that board, I think. What have we got going on here? So we have Laboratory to draw alongside Wishing Well, and we've got Moat as well. Replace, is that good? Yes, we can gain golds with Courtier, and Courtier has 1, 2, 3, 4. I guess we're not going to bother with Bureaucrat. Yeah, so we can gain golds, we can replace them to turn them into provinces while junking our opponent. We've got Laboratory for draw. The trashing is Moneylender and Replacer, so we can get thin. The Replace can turn into like Mills or Wishing Well. We're going to open Mill and... Is Vassal going to be better than Wishing Well? I mean, probably. Do we really want to open Vassal? No, we're not going to open Mill. We're going to open Moneylender, sorry. So we're going to open Moneylender, and then I think I don't like Vassal in that case. I think I then go for Wishing Well. So we open Moneylender, Wishing Well. We would much rather have Laboratories. Is there any plus buy here? There is. There's Courtier. So I think what we can do is we can use Courtier to gain a load of golds and our buys. We can draw up using Laboratories if we gain enough, and some Wishing Well support. We're going to be replacing golds eventually into provinces, and we can just build a good deck that consists of those. Wishing Well will be fine if we have a spare 3. I don't think I ever want to buy a silver in this deck if I can help it. Possibly. So... And we're going to get Replace fairly early, and it's going to replace... It's probably going to replace Estates into Wishing Wells early on, I think. We may not bother with Mill. I mean, it's fine. Eventually, we probably get a Mill, but I think I like the Wishing Well. So Wishing Well's okay here. We've got other draw with Lab, but Wishing Well being cheap, and we've got a fairly homogeneous deck. We're going to have 1 Moneylender, 1 Courtier, 1 Replace, a bunch of Labs, a bunch of Wishing Wells, a bunch of Golds. So we got like 3 fairly common decks. It's going to be okay, Wishing Well, but I think I like that. Maybe, no, I don't like Vassal. There's too many. We could probably have Wishing Well and Vassal together, but I don't know if we can gain that many so easily. So yeah, I think Wishing Well is fine here. We open with it. I don't know how many we end up getting. I think you play it by ear, but you certainly pick it up on 3. I think it's what you want the most on 3 or less. Sorry, not less. On 3 or 4, I think you pick up a wishing well for a long time after you've got the moneylender. So you just sort of get it because it's there and you have nothing better to get, I suppose. So there you go. So that was Wishing Well. The card was all right in a lot of those decks. It wasn't always It wasn't always great. Sometimes you just don't have time for it. There are just better things to buy at 3. Usually Wishing Well is fine in your deck, but when you're not actually getting any extra draw from it, it's a bit of a waste of time, so it's just opportunity cost problems. So that was Wishing Well. I hope that video was useful for you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.